Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Beneath the Surface from Marine Mammal Care Center. Today, we are really pleased to invite another speaker from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, who today is going to talk to us a little bit about the elephant seals that you can find up along our coast and also at the care center and other care centers up and down the coast of California. So it's with great pleasure that I'd like to introduce Katie Saenger, who is a first-year master's student in Dr. Heather Liwanag. I messed it up again. Liwanag. Anyways, in Dr. Heather's Vertebrate Investigative Physiology Lab at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Katie received her undergraduate degree from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in marine sciences, where she studied topics ranging from rockfish growth rates to northern elephant seal behavior. She's currently a wildlife biologist for an environmental consulting firm in San Luis Obispo and is a team leader for her lab's long-term northern elephant seal population monitoring program. So we are super excited to have another researcher from the VIP lab at San Luis Obispo. And without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Katie.
Cool. Thank you, Dave, for that introduction. I'm really honored to be chosen for this series, and I am really excited to share my research with you all today. So with that, let's get into it. So today I'm going to be talking about our population monitoring program at the Piedras Blancas Northern Elephant Seal breeding site, or what we like to call Team Ellie in our lab. So today I'm going to go over a little bit of northern elephant seal life history to provide you guys some context. I'm then going to go into the conservation history of this species. Of course, go into our population monitoring program at Cal Poly and talk about some of our field methods on our objectives and what we're trying to learn from our rookery. And then I am going to share a little bit of preliminary data from my thesis work, which is looking at migration pathways of weaned pups when they first leave the beach. Before I get into it, though, I just wanted to define some interchangeable terms that I often use in my presentations. So if you hear me saying weaned pup, weaner, weanling, I am talking about the same thing. It is just a pup that is weaned from its mom. And then I often interchangeably use breeding site and rookery, but I am referring to the same thing. Okay, let's talk about the northern elephant seal. So the northern elephant seal is a really incredible animal, and it is one of the largest pinnipeds, second only to the southern elephant seal. Adult males can get up to about 5,000 pounds, and adult females can be around 1,200 pounds. And so this really demonstrates also the sexual dimorphism in this species, which is really pronounced. They spend most of their lives out at sea, which means they spend about 8 months out at sea, and then the remaining months they have hauled out on land. They only haul out 2 times a year, once for the breeding season and once for the molting season, where they do a catastrophic molt, which basically just means that they molt off all the top layer of their skin and fur all at once, instead of gradually like us. They also have foraging grounds that range from Alaska to Mexico, and so they are really wide-ranging species and will travel thousands of miles to find food. And their current global population is around 250,000. And so currently this species is doing really, really well, but this wasn't always the case. As was the case with a lot of seals, in the 19th century, they were nearly driven to extinction by commercial sealers. They were actually thought to be extinct twice. The first time that they were rediscovered, they found about 8 seals on Guadalupe Island, which is in Mexico. And instead of conserving the species like we would today, instead they killed them all to put them in a museum and called it the last of the elephant seals. Luckily, that was not the last of the elephant seals, though. And after that, 20 to 100 seals was rediscovered in the early 20th century on Guadalupe Island. And the current population of seals have all come from those 20 to 100 on that island. Due to the passing of legislation, such as the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972, this species was able to recover and reach the population that it is today. Due to its incredible increase in size, it was able to reestablish historic breeding sites and also establish new sites along the West Coast. Two of those new sites that were established was Piedras Blancas, which is the main breeding site that our lab works out of, and also a breeding site was established at the Vandenberg Space Force Base, which is another one that we work out of. The Piedras Blancas breeding site is a relatively new rookery, and it was established in 1992 when the first pup was observed born. Its population as of 2010 was estimated to be about 25,000, with 5,000 pups born annually. And we began research at this rookery in 2017, with 2018 being our first breeding season. The Vandenberg breeding site is an even newer rookery, and it was established in 2017 when the first observed pup was being born. Since then, about 32 pups have been born a year. Oops. And we began research at this rookery in 2019. So a much, much smaller rookery than Piedras Blancas, but still very, very interesting. So the research objectives that we have for our population monitoring program is to, one, collect baseline population demographic data so we can compare across years to see how they change. Record movements among breeding sites and also between the beaches at our rookeries. Analyze harem structure, which I will go into more detail in later in this talk. And then weigh and measure weaned pups to see if the mass of these pups is changing each year, which could be a good indication of how well females are foraging while they are out at sea. So currently, we have past members of our lab working on a paper analyzing harem structure. So we should have a paper coming out about that in the next year or so. And we have a new graduate student coming in next year who's going to do a population analysis on the data that we've collected over the last 5 years and is going to touch on all 3 of these other objectives. So for our population monitoring, what we do is we do several field techniques to keep track of all of our seals. The first thing we do is marking. And so how we mark the seal is we mark them with hair dye. And so it is a temporary identification and it allows us to track them throughout the season before they molt. We also do flipper tags, which is much more permanent and allows us to track them throughout their lives. And we tag them in the interdigital webbing in their flipper. We also do surveying every time that we go out, and we'll do harem counts as well as recite our own tags and marks, and also recite tags from other rookeries. And lastly, we collect weaned pup morphometrics, which means we collect mass, length, and girth measurements from weaned pups that are born at our rookery. In Vandenberg, we have only been tagging and we haven't been weighing or surveying, but very recently, due to my thesis work, we have started weighing some weaned pups there. So how we do marking is, as you can see in this photo, we have this long stick that has a long handle and then a flat bit at the end. And then we take hair dye and we use blonde hair dye for the pups because they have a black coat when they're first born. And then we use brown hair dye for all other age classes because it shows up better on their lighter fur. And we will draw our marking scheme out on this flask bit backwards. And then we will go stamp the side of the seal. And so here's an example of what the marking process looks like. We will walk up to the seal and we will stamp the side of it like that. And then we will get out of there. In this case, you see that the seal didn't even wake up. That is often the case when we mark males. They often don't even notice that we've marked them. Other age classes are sometimes more sensitive, but the most that they'll do is just look at us and then they will go back to resting. So this is what the mark looks like when it's first applied. It's usually really bright white. And this is the case for pups with their black coat using blonde dye, and also on other age classes when we use brown dye. And so after it has set on the pups, it will turn into this sort of dark blonde mark on its side. And for the adults, it will set as a dark brown mark on their side. And so when it's applied correctly, it is really easy to see from the bluffs and from far away. And so it is super effective for tracking them throughout the season. So overall, marking is beneficial because it has really minimal disturbance. As you saw in that last video, sometimes they don't even wake up or notice that we've done it. Very easy to see whether it is blonde or a brown mark. We can often see it from above on the bluffs or farther down the beach using binos. We can apply it to all age classes. So we have marked adult females, adult males, pups, juveniles, and all of them can be marked. And it allows us to track the movement of all these different age classes throughout the breeding season. And it is also temporary. So we will mark them during the breeding season, and then when the molting season comes around, they will molt off that mark. And so it does not last forever. However, a more permanent way of identifying these animals is to give them flipper tags. We only tag weaned pups because it is more dangerous to try to tag the adults because they are very large animals. And we will tag these animals just to tag them, or we will tag them during the weighing process. And I will go over that in a little bit. For Piedras Blancas, we use white tags. So if you ever see a white tag out at any of the breeding sites, that seal is from our rookery. And for Vandenberg, we use blue. So keep an eye out for the blue tags as well. We get a lot of white tag resites at Piedras Blancas, which makes sense because they are returning to their natal breeding site. But we also get a lot of different colored tags. We often see green tags, which are from Año Nuevo. And lately we've been seeing a lot of yellow and red tags from San Miguel and San Nicolas. And of course, we do see a lot of orange tags as well from the marine mammal rescue organizations. So lastly, we want to go over the weaned pup morphometrics, which includes getting the sex and the weight, measuring the length and the girth of the animal, and then also flipper tagging. And so I'm going to go over that in a little bit more detail in this slide. So for the weighing process, what we'll do is we'll first bag the seal. And so we use a specially made canvas bag, which you can see right here. And it has handles on either side, which makes it easier to handle the bag. And there is an air hole at the top. So when the seal is in the bag, it can breathe perfectly well. What we'll do is we'll throw it over the head of the seal. And then once it is over the head, we will take the sides of the bag and pull it down the body. And usually 2 people assist with this. And they will roll the seal and work the seal until it is fully in the bag. And this only usually takes a couple minutes. Then once the seal is totally in the bag and we have tied off the end so it is secured, we will hoist it on a tripod, which has a scale attached to it, which you can see in the yellow right here. Once the animal is completely off the ground, we will go hands off and then record the mass of the animal. Once we are done recording the mass, we immediately let the animal down and then we start measurements. And so we'll do 2 different length measurements. Standard length, which is held over the body and just gets the general length. And then we have curvilinear length, which is held up to the body and will measure the curve of the animal. And then we also measure the girth of the animal at its widest point, which is under its armpits. Once we have gotten the length measurements, we then tag the seal. And so when we weigh seals, we give them 2 flipper tags. And when we don't weigh them, we only give them 1 flipper tag. And so this helps us distinguish which seals we have weighed and which ones we have not. And as you can see, we have volunteers restraining the animal at the head, and then we have people assisting with holding the flippers while someone tags. Once it's tagged, then the last thing we do actually is getting the girth measurement because we have to scoot the animal out almost entirely out of the bag just so its head is covered. Once we get the girth, we will then release the animal. And this whole process, once all the volunteers are trained and have gotten really good at it, only takes about 8 minutes. And so we have gotten very efficient, and we try to make sure that the animal is not handled any longer than it needs to be. Okay, the last thing we do for our field techniques is we do surveying. We do weekly surveys at all the beaches at our rookery. We have about 7 beaches that we visit at the Piedras Blancas rookery because it is a very, very large rookery. We do ground and bluff surveys depending on the number of seals on the beach and the terrain. When we do these surveys, we do total counts, like total number of seals on the beach. And then we also do counts distinguished by age class. So how many juveniles, how many adult males, how many females, etc. We also do a lot of recites. So this is when we recite our own marks and our own tags, as well as other rookeries' tags and marks. And then we also do harem classifications. And so the northern elephant seal creates harems during the breeding season, where it'll be one male with a bunch of females, and that male will protect its group of females so it can mate at the end of the season. And so we like to classify the harems depending on where they are in relation to other harems. And so if it is a harem that on either side is surrounded by other harems within 10 meters, we call that a central harem. If it's a harem that only has harems on one side within 10 meters, it's peripheral. And if we have a harem that has no other harems within 10 meters close to it, we call that an isolated harem. And so currently someone is doing an analysis with this, but it is really interesting because depending on where they are on the beach, it may determine the dominance of the male and other mating opportunities. We have also started doing this last November, drone surveys to kind of supplement our ground and bluff surveys. So let's see if this plays. Yeah. So what we do is the drone pilots will program a flight, which is just telling the drone what area to fly. And the drone will fly along the beach just like this, taking photos as it goes. And right now we are working with the computer science department at Cal Poly to try to develop a program to identify different age classes from these photos. We are still working on this, but until then, these videos and photos can help us see seals that we might not have seen in these corners right here and help us get total counts that might be a little bit more accurate. So Team Ellie, as I said, started in 2017. And when we first started this program, we only had 2 graduate students in the lab and 12 undergrads. Since then, as of last year, we had 56 undergrads and 3 graduate students. And this coming year, we are going to have 5 graduate students and 53 undergrads. So our program has really grown, and it is really cool to see how much data we are able to collect with more volunteers. Again, because of our growth in our program, we have seen a lot of our efforts increase and the number of data we have collected increase. And so in the 2018 breeding season, which was our first breeding season, we had about 160 marked animals, 270 flipper tags, and about 50 weaners that we weighed. And last year, we marked about 850 animals. And then flipper tags, we had about 1850 at Piedras Blancas and 38 at Vandenberg. And then we actually weighed 500 weaners this last year, which was our permit limit. So we were really excited that we were able to max out at the number of weighs we were able to get. So it is really important that we keep increasing the number of marked animals, flipper tags, and weaners weighed each year, because as I stated earlier in this lecture, Piedras Blancas has a population of about 25,000, and there's about 5,000 pups born annually. And so we want to make sure that we are sampling a great enough percentage of the population so we can really capture the population dynamics each year. So this last summer, me and a few other previous members of the lab did a very preliminary population analysis to kind of see if we were seeing any trends with the data we've collected so far. The first thing we did is we looked at average survey counts per beach across years to see if the number of seals at each beach was changing at all or remaining constant. And we found during the breeding season, they remained relatively constant each year. However, there was an increase in the 2019 to 2020 season, and then it went right back down the following season. And so we do believe that this is a fluctuation, but we do want to look at a few more years of survey data to see if we keep seeing fluctuations like this or if it was just an anomaly. We did the same thing for the molting season. And so we looked at total seals on each beach and we looked at it across the years, and we found that the total number of seals had not changed at all across years. And so from these results, we can sort of glean that from the beaches that we have been consistently surveying across years, the number of seals has not changed, which might indicate that the beaches that we're surveying may have reached the max amount of seals that they can handle or their own carrying capacity. However, we cannot say that the entire rookery has stopped growing because we have gotten reports that there have been elephant seals sighted at beaches more north of us and at beaches that we do not survey. And so in the next coming years, we want to expand our reach and try to survey as many beaches as we can so we can really get all of the seals in the rookery in our data. We also briefly took a look at the weanling morphometrics, specifically looking at the mass of these weaned pups. And we found that they actually were very, very constant each year. So from 2018 to 2021, the average weight of these weaned pups did not change. In fact, the average each year was consistently 123 kilograms. So this is really cool because it means that there hasn't been any changes in foraging opportunities for the females or anything else that might affect the weight of these weaned pups. But we want to look in the future to see if we keep seeing this trend. And by monitoring this, we can maybe help identify problems sooner if we see a dip in the mass. In the future for this population work, we do want to determine if the entire rookery has reached carrying capacity. And so there was a really interesting paper that came out by Lowry in 2014 that looked at all the rookeries along all the northern elephant seal rookeries and compared the number of births per year. And as you can see in this graph, rookeries such as Año Nuevo, Point Reyes, and the Farallon Islands were increasing for a bit, but started to level out in the recent years. However, as of 2010, our rookery, Piedras Blancas in the triangles right here, you can see that it was still increasing at a really drastic rate. And so since it has been about 12 years since an analysis has been done on Piedras Blancas, we want to see if the entire rookery has sort of plateaued out and if it has reached carrying capacity. And so hopefully the new grad student coming in will tackle a little bit of that. We can see if it has. We also want to do a population estimate. Again, the last population estimate for this rookery was in 2010, and it estimated it to be about 25,000. We expect that it has grown since then, so it'd be really interesting to get a more accurate population estimate of this rookery. We also want to compare more population parameters across years, stuff like the weaned pup morphometrics, continue that analysis, look at movement between beaches, number of resites, rate of pup survival. And then we also want to compare metrics like this to other rookeries to see if there are any differences. Okay. So moving on a little bit to the undergraduates in our lab is really run entirely by undergraduates. They do so much for us. They are our volunteers that help us with our field work, and they are often helping us with leadership opportunities as well. And so we like to provide a lot of opportunities for our undergraduates so they can succeed. First of all is leadership opportunities. So in our population monitoring program, we have field leads that will lead field crews out for the surveys and the weighing and the breeding season. And a lot of our field leads are undergraduates who started out as just volunteers in the lab. And so if you are doing really well in the lab, we always offer that opportunity up. There's also an opportunity to become a drone pilot and work with the drones on surveying. We have several undergraduates helping with that right now and definitely would love more help. Senior projects, if undergraduates have an idea for a research project, we always encourage them to talk to our advisor and to develop their own senior project. And we've had a lot of senior projects come out of this lab. They also have the opportunity to get involved in other projects besides the population monitoring program. There was a bioacoustic study, a mom and pup recognition study, which was done by Molly Murphy, who spoke a couple weeks ago in this series. And she employed a lot of volunteers to help her with that project. There's a male dominance behavior project right now, which was actually my senior project when I was an undergrad in the lab, and I have continued it on. And I've been taking on about 3 to 4 undergraduates each year to help me continue that. There's also sea otter thermoregulation, which is Kate Reardon's talk, who actually, I believe she talked a few weeks ago, not Molly Murphy. Molly Murphy's talking after me. But she has had a lot of volunteers come through and help her with her pelt analysis and stuff like that. And so we really appreciate our volunteers and we like to give them as many opportunities as possible. Also, my satellite tagging work, we have taken on a couple undergraduates each, at least this year when I first started, and I plan on taking them on more in the future. With that, I'm going to segue to talking about a little bit of my thesis work that I have done so far. So I am a first year graduate student, and so I have only done one field season so far for this project, but I would like to share a little bit of the preliminary data that I have gotten. And so before I dive into that, I just want to give a little context so it makes sense of why we're doing this project. So as I stated earlier in this lecture, northern elephant seals spend about 8 months out of the year out at sea. They haul out only for the breeding and the molting season. And pups are born from late December to early February. And then the mothers will nurse them for 4 weeks before the pups are weaned. So it's a very short nursing period. And then the pups will spend a couple months on the beach, mostly learning how to swim in the coastal creeks and ponds. And then when they get hungry enough, they will leave by the end of May to go forage out at sea. So there has been a lot of studies done on the movement of adults and juveniles during their big migrations after the breeding season. Most of this work has come out of UC Santa Cruz. And through their adult migration studies, they have found that females typically head out straight to open ocean to forage, whereas males will stick along the coast and forage along the coast all the way up to the Aleutian Islands. And they believe that the reason for this is that females want to go out to open ocean because there are less predators, and males will stick to the coast because there's more food opportunity, which allows them to get bigger and be able to fight better during the breeding season, though they do risk having more predators, and often there's a higher mortality in the males. They have also done juvenile migration studies. This is for juveniles that are a year old, and males are in the solid circle and females are in the open circle. And you can see that the sexual dimorphism that is shown in the adult migration paths is not seen in the juvenile migration paths. Instead, both seem to be observed going up just along the coast and not going out into open ocean. There's also studies done on juveniles that were 2 years old, and you can see that there's still not a sexual dimorphism, but the seals are starting to venture out into open ocean. So despite the number of studies that have been done on juveniles and adults, there is actually no information or little to no information on where weaned pups go during their first foraging migration. And so that is why, for my thesis work, my goal is to determine the migratory pathways of weaned northern elephant seals during their first at-sea foraging migration. So how we are going to accomplish that is we are going to deploy VHF and satellite tags on weaned pups. And so satellite tags are going to allow us to track the seals while they are out in ocean. Whenever they surface, the satellite tag will send a ping to the satellite, and then the satellite will upload the location information to a portal that I have access to. And then if the pup hauls out at a beach after its migration and I am able to access it and it is within driving distance, the VHF will help me locate the seal when it is on the beach. And so satellite tags is for the long distance travel. VHF is for relocating the seals after they come back from their migration. We are going to have a sample size of 25 seals for this project. And the first year, which I have already completed, we deployed these tags in April of this year. We deployed 5 satellite tags at the Vandenberg Space Force Base. This following year, we are going to deploy 5 more at Vandenberg, and then hopefully we're planning on deploying 5 at Piedras Blancas as well. And then the third year, we are going to repeat that same process and do 5 at Vandenberg and 5 at Piedras Blancas. And so hopefully we will be able to glean some information from the different rookeries and see if there are any differences from that. For the tags, these are sort of what the tags look like. I had to modify them a little bit because we actually got a lot of guidance from UC Santa Cruz, who is doing a very similar project to this right now. And what difficulties come from tagging weaned pups is that for satellite tags and VHF tags, we need to glue them to the body of the seal using marine epoxy. But since the seals are born with their natal coat and then quickly molt off and get their more adult pelage, their new coat is really short, and oftentimes it's hard for equipment to stick to those really short hairs. And so what we had to do is we had to modify the tags a little bit to make sure that there was a greater surface area, so it is easier for the tags to stay on the seals. And so we took mesh for both of these tags and treated it with asphalt sealant so that it wouldn't break down in the salt water. And then we attached the mesh to the tags using zip ties. And then we also wrapped the tags in electrical tape. And so hopefully this will allow the tags to stay on a lot easier onto the seal, and it might help with an easier recovery if we are able to recover the seal after their migration. So how we apply these tags in the field is first, we went through a similar process as we do with the wang, is first we bagged the seal using our specially made canvas bag. And we only chose seals of really good body condition before we bagged them. We then weighed them. One of the reasons we weighed them was, one, we wanted to get a weight pre-migration, just in case we were able to recover them after the migration, so we could compare foraging success. And for this fieldwork, we did need to sedate the animals to put the tags on. And so we wanted to get the weight so we could give them the proper dosage of the sedative. Then once we weighed them, 2 vets who helped us with this project from the Marine Mammal Center gave the seal the proper dosage, and then we waited about 15 minutes for the seal to become fully sedated. And then we began doing measurements such as length measurements and girth measurements on the seal. Once we did the weight, the length, and the girth measurements, we then attached the 2 tags. And so we attached the satellite tag onto the head of the seal. And the reason we did this is because while the seal is out at sea, the only part of its body that'll come out of the water is the head when they surface. And the satellite tag needs to be above water to send a signal to the satellites. And so we put them on the head, and then we put the VHF tags on the back of the seal, because then the VHF would only start pinging when the seal is fully hauled out on land. Then we gave the seal 2 tags. We gave them 2 tags because the seal has been weighed. And we also gave this seal a mark, which corresponded to one of its tag numbers. And this will just make it easier for us to identify the individual if it does haul out in an accessible site. Then once we had done all that, we release the seal and we have one of our volunteers monitor them for about 40 minutes afterwards, because we wanted to make sure that none of the seals were going into the water right after sedation, because that could be really dangerous for them. So I just wanted to share a little brief clip from the process. And so this is when we were measuring the seal, and you can see that the seal is completely sedated while we are doing this. And right here, these are the two vets from the Marine Mammal Center. And during this entire process, they were monitoring the seal's heart rates and looking at their gum color and making sure that they were not having any bad effects to the sedation. And so you can see she's taking the heart rate right now while we take length measurements. And the girl in the bucket hat right here is one of the undergraduates in our lab who was helping us out. And you can see there are a lot of people in this video because there was a lot of manpower that was needed for this project. And a lot of people from the Vertebrate Bear Base actually helped us out. And we are incredibly grateful for that. So as I said, we deployed 5 tags out at Vandenberg today, or not today, this year in April. And these are the 5 that we deployed. So we named them after launches at the Vandenberg Air Base, which is why they kind of have some funky names. Phantom and Minotaur are the 2 girls this year, and then the rest are boys. And they have been swimming since April. As I stated before, we put out VHF and satellite. This is an antenna that we'll use when we are trying to locate them on the beach using VHF. And this is just a picture of us testing it after we first deployed them. And then over here is an example of what the satellite tracks look like and what sort of data we're getting. And so before I dive into this, if you want to track the seals on your own, you can scan this QR code. Right now, only Vulcan is still active. Unfortunately, we do believe that the other 4 have died and fell prey to some sort of predator, either a great white or an orca, because they stopped transmitting. But if you would like to track Vulcan, he was still active as of yesterday. And so what is really interesting about these satellite tracks so far is they all were going north and they all stuck relatively close to the coast. And so we were seeing none of these large journeys out into open ocean that we saw with the older juveniles and the adult females. And so they are following pretty similarly to the 1-year-old juveniles that were studied at the UC Santa Cruz breeding site. Also, it was really cool. One of our seals, Minotaur, you could see was our longest journeyer, and she went all the way up to Victoria before she stopped transmitting. Whereas the other seals stuck around the Bay Area, and then Vulcan is right here in Northern California foraging right now. So if you're interested, definitely scan that QR code and check it out. And if Vulcan does die soon, we will be deploying more seals in April for the next 2 years. And so you can track all the new seals that we put out. So next steps for this project, I'm going to continue monitoring the tag seals, which is now 1 seal because Vulcan is the only one left. Once all the seals stop transmitting, I'm going to start analysis of this first year's data. And so I'm going to look at migration pathways, see how they differ between the seals in my study and also between different age classes in previous studies, such as juveniles and adults. And I also want to try to identify foraging areas as they migrated up the coast to see what foraging areas are important for seals at this life stage. And then in the following 2 years, we are going to tag 20 more seals, and hopefully we get at least half of those back. The mortality rate at this life stage is very high, and so we're hoping to get at least 10 of those seals with real good data. Okay, Thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge a few people before I end this talk. My advisor, Dr. Heather Liwanag, for providing all these opportunities for us. Of course, Team Ellie, all the graduate students and undergraduate volunteers. This list right here is just last year's volunteers, and it doesn't even include all the previous years. So it just gives you a glimpse of how many people contribute to this monitoring project at our lab. And I also want to thank Dr. Costa, Dr. Rachel Holzer, and Dr. Patrick Robinson from UC Santa Cruz for their guidance. Friends of the Elephant Seal, which is a nonprofit group that has been supporting our research since we started. Brian Hatfield, who is a biologist at USGS, who began monitoring this population before we started. NOAA and state parks for our permits. The Vandenberg Space Force Base for supporting my research and allowing me to do my fieldwork and do the satellite tagging at their beach. And also the Marine Mammal Center for all their support, and the vets who helped me with my thesis work this year and will help me in the following years. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was really very interesting, and I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us tonight. So if anybody watching right now has any questions, you can add those to the chat, and we can talk for a little bit at the end here about any of your questions. First question coming from Jessica Kenny. What software do you utilize for your statistical analysis?
That is an excellent question. I have not. Are you talking about the population analysis that I've done, or what I'm going to do for my thesis work?
Jessica doesn't stipulate. Both.
That is
upcoming, she says.
For the software, I mostly use RStudio because that was what I was trained with, and it is the easiest, I believe, to glean really important information from it. I don't know exactly what statistical analysis I'm going to do for my thesis work, but I will hopefully know soon, and I'm going to meet with some of my committee to talk about that.
Very cool. I had a question about, you'd mentioned that the mortality rate for young animals or animals in their first year is pretty high. Do you know, is there a number that you can associate with that?
I think it's about 50%.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Do you know how they determine that?
I believe it was determined based out of studies out of UC Santa Cruz, and I think it was their migration studies and also their tagging efforts. So they looked at how many tags they put out and how many seals came back, and then also through satellite tagging.
It's an expensive orca snack to get one of those. That's really fascinating. I know that when you put a satellite tag on an animal, it goes out to sea. There's any number of different things that can happen to the tag, from technical difficulties to a predation event. So but if the mortality is pretty high, then that's great that you got the data that you got.
Yes, no, I'm very happy with the amount I got. I thought they were going to die a lot sooner.
It's very cool. And I just wanted to touch too about the importance of long-term data sets. I mean, you're just beginning to grab some of this information starting in 2018 and seeing sort of the weights of juveniles and being able to tell maybe even population health based on, how well they're surviving with, drinking mom's milk. It's a great indicator of potentially population health, but having that data set year after year after years is critically important for us to answer some of these broad questions that you can't just answer in 1 or 3 years or 2 years or 5 years, however long it takes to do a master's or a PhD these days. So it's great that the lab is beginning in that work, and I look forward to getting a chance to see how that data increases over time.
I'm excited too.
So do you have your sights on a PhD after this master's?
I am not sure. I don't think immediately I would go into a PhD program, but it is definitely a possibility after this because I do really like research.
Well, it's very cool. See, we have another question from Tracy. Were there changes in your observations due to COVID? How did COVID figure its way into your project, your program?
That is a really great question, actually. We were very fortunate where COVID didn't affect us too much because all of our research is outside. We did have to change some of our protocols though. So usually what we do is we will all carpool out in like a school van to do our research, weekly surveys and stuff like that. We did have to start having our volunteers take separate cars for a while when the pandemic was really at its peak. And we also had our volunteers wearing masks while in their cars and also out in the field for a very long time, like a year or two. But luckily, with the mask regulations that we imposed and also the separate cars, we didn't have any stoppage in our research and we were able to continue on throughout the pandemic.
That's very cool. Couple questions. Yeah, it's a pretty short time frame, and a lot of it was in and around COVID. But did you notice any changes in behavior of the animals based on maybe the number of people that are around? Assuming that COVID may have cut down on the number of visitors to Piedras Blancas Beach. Did you notice anything different for the animals, or are they pretty much doing their thing?
They were pretty much doing their thing. We did notice, I believe it was last year, there were a few more aggressive females than usual. I don't know if that was due to less human interaction or if they were just crabbier that year. But we did have a little bit more instances of females coming after us. But the elephant seal, in my experience, they don't seem too affected by people. You can walk around them and they don't care too much. So no big changes with the pandemic.
Are you actually marking down the aggressiveness of the animals? Is that a data point you're taking?
We haven't been, but we probably should be. It's mostly just been funny stories of like, I got chased by a female today, or I've been chased a couple times this month, which is more than usual.
Another question from Nikel. What about in terms of migration patterns? We've heard changes in path with less boats, things. So I think it would be hard to answer that question. You're just starting to understand migration patterns, right?
Hopefully in the future, if we keep putting out satellite tags on our seals and we get a really good indication of where they like to migrate at different life stages, we can start incorporating things like boat pathways and stuff like that. But in this really beginning stage, there's so many factors that could be affecting where they go. I think it would be really hard to isolate it. But I would love to determine that. That would be really cool.
It's the really exciting part about being in the first few years of getting the information, right? Get to see where it leads you. Adia Harrison is asking, how do you protect yourself and the seals? We saw that you had the canvas bags and the covers to tag. How dangerous is the work that you're doing?
Luckily we train our volunteers really well, and since I was an undergrad in the lab, I was trained really well by the past field leads. It does get dangerous at times, but we do make sure everyone is really aware of our surroundings. We have, every time we are handling an animal or we are walking among the animals, we always have lookouts. And so one person is focused on the task while others are looking around to make sure there's no seals sneaking up on us. We wear gloves, and the canvas bags really help with handling. I've been bit through the bag, but since the bag is pretty thick, it only left a bruise. It didn't puncture the skin. And we have had some close calls, but luckily our training process is really good, so we don't have that many close calls because we're all really aware. But occasionally I will get caught between two males that are coming at each other, or a female will come out of a corner that I didn't see and I have to run up a bluff. But overall, our program is really safe, and we have had, knock on wood, no really significant injuries or anything like that.
That's great to hear. So elephant seals seem to be doing really well. Their populations seem to be growing, expanding. the question coming in is, as the rookeries are, and the question is migrating south, although I do know that that's like from Piedras Blancas to Vandenberg south, but they're also moving north, right? We're seeing different new rookeries expanding into spaces like, I think there's even one starting up in Seattle now, pretty far north. Any thoughts or ideas about the encroachment of the rookeries on more populated spaces? They're pretty much in pretty far away, far from people spaces at the moment, but the one in Seattle is pretty close to people.
Yeah, I do foresee some issues coming out of it. We're already witnessing it at Piedras Blancas. We have such a we're actually the largest mainland rookery, and it seems to keep expanding. And we've had instances where we have this state beach that is for the people, and a lot of people go there. And in recent years, a lot of male seals that have been kicked off their beaches because they weren't as dominant as some of the other males have come to this beach and started setting up shop. And it has caused some human seal interactions that were problematic. And we've had to talk to people and make sure that they avoid them. And so I do see, if the seal population keeps increasing like it is, there are going to be more elephant seals probably on people populated beaches or closer to human populations. And we might run into some difficulty there. We're just going to have to, hopefully there's nonprofits up along the coast who can educate people on how to keep their distance, and we can try to work with them as they increase their population. But it's going to be really interesting seeing how that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful thing that we see happening based on really great protections and conservation. We're seeing populations really grow and expand. I know we have a rookery down in La Jolla that's really within a not for elephant seals, but for California sea lions they're in some very populated and popular spaces, and elephant seals now moving into some of those spaces as well. The rookery in Point Reyes, I think took over the parking lot of a visitor center or something like that. But like you said, it's it's what a wonderful problem to have these animals whose populations are doing so well, and it's such an amazing opportunity for people to recognize the amazing variety and diversity of wildlife that we have, right in and around our most populous spaces. I think, some of the biggest elephant seal rookeries are just off the coast of Southern California, in the Channel Islands, right off of Santa Barbara. And these really densely populated spaces have some really incredible wildlife still right there with them. So, maybe it's an opportunity, not just a challenge.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for taking time. This has been really interesting for me. I hope it was interesting for everybody else. We want to thank Marathon, of course, for helping to sponsor these talks. And we will get a chance to see Molly Porter on September 15th, another student from the VIP lab. So I hope to get a chance to see everybody again on the 15th. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for coming and listening.
Bye, everybody.